Currently, David is the colony governor for the Albany Colony Society of Mayflower's descendants in the state of New York. In his free time, he does presentations for historical societies, libraries, hereditary, and genealogical societies. So welcome, David Wade Morton, and thank you for coming.
Thank you. Thank you. This is one of my favorite areas to present because they're so thorough with the technology, and I don't have to lug my stuff from my car here. I've been to so many places where screens were missing, where the computer was fine, but it didn't have the, what's it called, VPA cord that connects the computer to the projector, and on it goes. This one has been flawless, and I really appreciate Tabitha and all her work. Just to plug on this, this is a beautiful setting in the research room. The Syracuse library, as you probably know, was lost. We used to be on the 5th floor at the galleries, and it was like this, only much more voluminous. Now, most of the documents I need, you need, are under lock and key, computer lock and key. And the only access you have is computer by catalog, if you know. And as I told Holly Salmons, she is a wonderful woman, who recently retired from the library, we've lost our ability to browse. And genealogy is all about browsing. You need to look at the shelves. For example, look what I found on your shelf in this room. My name. That's what you're looking for, not your name. It just happens to be my name. But you're looking for your family name. And the only way to do it is you have to go, and that's Tabitha or whoever did the cataloging, it's all in alpha. So just whatever your last name is, look for the S's for Smith or the J's for Jones. That's how you get started. And I found my name. There's more to this though, I found something else in there. I do need help distributing the slide presentation I'm going to show you. It's in 2 parts. You can see this one was done in portfolio, and most of it will be landscape. So I did copy the portfolio, and I have a little handout for you to pencil paper, some of your own lineage you'll find in just a moment. But I can go on with the presentation prior to you receiving this, because what you're going to write is at the tail end of this. There are 11 slides, I'll warn you. Does anyone know the photograph that's on this slide? What it is?
Sure.
Which one? Cortland County Courthouse, which I'm hoping to go after this presentation over there to find a vital record. The Cortland County Historical Society, and most of this presentation is on Cortland. Have any of you seen this picture of the drawing Valerie has? Okay, couple. This is early Cortland. Cortland County was formed between 1808 and 1812. And this is what it looked like. No such thing as Cortland. It was Homer. Right? Cortlandville and the city of Cortland is all Homer. How do you pronounce this? Solon. That's what I thought. I just wanted you to say it before I made a mistake. Solon, Virgil, which today is really Hartford, Lapeer, and Virgil. Cincinnatus has been broken up. Cincinnatus, I'm sorry. I should know that because I worked in Norwich. We always call it Cincinnati. I'm from Syracuse, so it's Cincinnati. Yeah. Truxton, Preble, and also Tully and Fabius. And part of this presentation, my brother said, you're talking about geography, that's about lands and rivers and hills and creeks. And I said, well, this is human geography. People and why they moved, and also boundaries. And we in Central New York in particular know a lot about boundaries. We know that the military tract of 1783 started the whole process. After we defeated the British and also the Iroquois Indians, we took their land away. And we created these towns. Most of them have Roman names, sometimes Greek, and a few English names. So we hear names like Sempronius, Scipio, Pompey, Fabius. Those were all part of the original military tract. Because I'm a family genealogist, I guess as much as a historian, I'll say, if you're looking for records, don't rule out Onondaga County, because if you're looking for something that occurred before 1808, it might be in Syracuse. (1812) and 1815, Solon annexed to Truxton. See? So prior to 1812, if you're looking for a land record, there's only one place to look, Solon. Because Truxton didn't exist. What I discovered just playing around with Cortland here a little bit, a lot of your towns were named after military leaders. I haven't found that in too many counties. I found political people, like Madison County, President Madison. But in Cortland, there seemed to be some military people that I've never heard of. Whether they had some direct connection, I really can't tell you. Often they didn't. Mount Vernon, for example. George Washington's half-brother, Lawrence, who built Mount Vernon, named it after the admiral that he served under during the War of Jenkins' Ear back in the 1740s. Admiral Vernon, who had never been to Washington or Virginia, but he was his beloved admiral from the Civil War when they fought off South America against the French. Preble and Scott were created. See, no Cortland yet. This one was 1827. Now Cincinnatus was divided. Virgil's still there. That was all I could find. But what I did find is a little description, and that's why I made copies for you, of each of the towns in Cortland. So let's take Virgil. Virgil was formed from Homer in 1804. By the way, my Morton ancestor was here in 1820. How many of your ancestors were in Virgil or Cortland County in 1820? Good, okay. And you can find a lot of that on the census. Could we back up one? Two, I'm sorry. Just wanted to show Lapeer was formed.
Lapeer,
okay. Lapeer, I call it Greek Pete, but that's another story. Lapeer was formed from Virgil, and Hartford was formed from Virgil, 1845. My ancestor, Joel Morton, who was Francis' father, moved here from Norwich, New York, probably before 1830. It's a little iffy because I know he moved in with his son, Francis. So Francis appears on the census, but Joel and his wife were living there. Joel lived to be quite old. He died in 1845. So as far as he knows, and anything I have from Joel Morton tells me he lived in Virgil. I know he's buried in Hartford, the Hartford Cemetery on Route 38. I don't know if he lived in Hartford, Lapeer, or Virgil. All he knew, it was called Virgil prior to 1845. And that's what it looks like today. See? There's the city of Cortland. I always wondered why Cortlandville is on the east and the west and the north and the south side of Cortland. Surrounded, yeah. But that actually, originally, it was Homer. I grew up knowing Homer from my great aunt who took me to Fillmore Glen. I used to travel to Cortland a lot. And Homer in particular, we went through, or by Homer Gulch, and that's geography, right? Coming down there is a beautiful scene. I remember doing that as a little boy. Now, before you get started, you have a pencil and you also have a handout. You do have this handout in your packet, so if you want it for future reference. What I'd like you to do is put your name, and I'll tell you, once you get into genealogy, you appreciate more and more your middle name. So put down your whole name. Mine happens to be David Wade Morton. And then your father's name, middle name too. And your mother's name, and her middle name. This is for you, I'm not going to look at it. And then the next section, please complete by writing the city, village, or town and county in the spaces provided. I was born in what city, village, or town?
This is the beginning of my obituary, right?
There you go. I saw that in the Central New York Genealogy. Write your own obituary. And I said, oh, that sounds like fun. Well, this one didn't set right now. Didn't catch that mistake. I think counties are important. The more you get into genealogy, especially if you want to prove the stuff, counties are very important. I know my brother who lives in Connecticut says counties really are secondary to towns, which may be true. But I find a lot of information by knowing which county. Often in the 1600s, even the early 1700s, they really didn't mean New London, the city, Connecticut. They meant New London, the county, which is quite large. They lived in New London. They meant the county. Same with us. If you were born in the city of Cortland, then you are from Cortland County, and obviously New York is the state. However, at birth, where'd you live? Same place? I was born in a hospital. I know I didn't live there too long. Where did you live at the time of birth? Next one might be hard. Where were you baptized? As you go back into genealogy, even your great-grandparents, often you can't find their birth or vital record unless you're lucky. But you might know their baptismal. Churches kept good records. And baptismals are acceptable. You just put BP, and then we know the location of the baptismal. Doesn't necessarily mean that's where they live. It means that's where they were baptized. I was married in. On your second or third marriage, that's where the notes come in. Finished? Or you can keep working on it. I'll keep going. Well, we're not going to do this one. I decided not to give you a hand. You have it there so you can look at it for future reference. But pick an ancestor. Pick your great-grandfather or grandmother and do the same thing. You might get stuck on who their parents were. I mean, we were talking about it over here. Sometimes, even when you had a formal New York State death certificate, people didn't tell others who their parents were. Mine happens to be Mucky. He's buried over in Hartfordville Cemetery. That's right next to Hartford Cemetery. That's on the Tioga County border. And his death certificate from New York, he died in 1899, right on the turn of the century, says Mucky. They just put down the last name. And on their mother, it's unknown. I know who they were, but at the time of his death, he didn't know. He was married a second time, and the woman was about 27 years younger. That could have caused a little issue. Maybe he never mentioned who his parents were. I don't know. But sometimes you can't find it, so sometimes we struggle here a little bit. And same thing, only now you can go a little further. Where did they live? And you probably need 7 or 8 lines here. They moved all over the place. And then where they died, which is not always where they were buried, the cemetery. More often than not, it's not the same town. Yes?
Do these programs that people use, are they editable or correctable so that you, as a descendant of somebody in your family, could add someone's mother or dad to their death certificate?
Not to my knowledge, yeah. Because the death certificate was done in 1899, for example.
But the digitized versions I'm talking about, so that somebody else further in the future could look back and say, oh, David already did this, and he's the one that figured out who great-great-grandma is and who great-great-grandpa is.
Correct.
And it would be interesting to have
It's a legal document that was signed and...
But what you're working digitized isn't a legal document, is it? It's a facsimile thereof.
If you're on Ancestry, you can
You can do this. Yeah. I was going to say, use Ancestry.
You could do it
Because
that
if
way.
people want to know about my lineage, they go to Ancestry. The problem with Ancestry, my son wouldn't let me delete. When I first started Ancestry in 2008, I attached everything. What a mistake.
It-
Yeah, it gives me something like 50,000 or 54,000 ancestors between 1600 and here. The reason it does that, it would repeat, like brothers and sisters back in, let's say, 1700. They might list 16 Marys, 16 Johns, and I just attached what I called the, stuff I should have deleted. So I started a second tree about 2011, and I only use my ancestor. I do not include brothers and sisters.
Good idea.
I do go back to the first document though, because especially from the present, I'd say till about the Revolutionary War, I've got good information on brothers and sisters that help prove the lineage I'm trying to work on. I've done that more often than not, and I'll submit those to genealogists saying, I can prove that, I'll give you specific, Samuel Howland and his brother John Howland, I can prove they were brothers. I can prove the ancestry of John Howland. I can't prove mine, Samuel, but they were brothers, and here's the proof. And then I worked back. By the way, I've destroyed all lineage proven in the New England Historical and Genealogical Society that said our family was descended from John Howland, and the Mayflower said, no, he wasn't. He was descended from his brother Arthur, who I had always heard. My great-grandmother's last name was Howland, and she said we were not Mayflower, and the family were Quakers. Arthur Howland was a Quaker, and his son, Arthur Jr., was a Quaker. And I proved it through land records, but father gave land to his son, John Howland of Swansea, which is over near the Rhode Island border. John Howland from Swansea moved to Scituate, Rhode Island with his brother Samuel Howland. And then in Samuel Howland's final land record, which looks like a will, he identified each of his sons and daughters and their location, because most had moved out of Rhode Island after the Revolution. And talk about a piece of gold. Mine lived in a place called Clarendon, Vermont, Rutland County, after the Revolution. Who even knows? Who's even heard of the name Clarendon, Vermont? It's in his will, or his land record, which reads like a will.
Why do you regret having written all that? I mean, I know it takes a lot of work to go through all that stuff, but somebody might, in the future, might be tickled pink that you did all that.
I'm sorry, why did I say I
I
regret?
think you had in the big tree.
Yeah, you.
The large tree with all the,
Yeah.
I guess they were viruses, so to speak.
Fringe benefits.
Yeah, in other words, 16 children, I only had one. In other words, 16 with the name Mary Howland. I had one Mary Howland.
Did you ever see a Irish list of Irish people and your relatives from Ireland? Everybody's named after that. Every boy is named after his grandfather.
Yeah,
for
no,
God's
that's
sake.
true. What I'm saying though, what Ancestry did in the early years is when you got out to, let's say, the 1700s with your family trees,
Yeah.
it would add almost anything. So that if, let's say there were 3 brothers and sisters, they would list 27, because each one would be repeated 9 times. And that's how I came up with 54,000.
Yeah.
My clean tree, which would be the ancestor and the son or daughter who I descend from, has 1900 and I forgot 70, I think, about 1970. It's a lot different than 54,000. So the clean tree, by the way, is the one I used for the book, the 4-volume book. But that's the one I primarily use. I do go to the old tree when I need records from brothers and sisters. Because sometimes leaves will come up that'll tell you stuff you didn't know.
Yes.
For example,
That's why I was wondering.
I found ancestors' names in Michigan. Because on so-and-so's death certificate, she mentions her mother and father from New York, and those were mine. So she would have been in an aunt-type relationship. Okay, any questions so far? This is the easy stuff. We're going to come back to what you wrote down and see if you came up with the right answers. Can we go to the second presentation?
We'll see.
And again, the reason I copied, I thought you might be interested in knowing a little bit about the history of each town. And I typed it in for you if you want to know when Truxton was created, which can be important if you're looking for land records. Geography, searching for the records in the right location, and part 2. Next, oh, I'm sorry, I can do it from here. Why is understanding geography important to genealogists when they search for family records? I think there's your answer. Now let's take Homer. If you're in the city of Cortland or you're in Cortlandville, you're not going to find it. Prior to 1808, you're going to have to look in Homer. One of the hardest things for me to find were great-grandparents' death certificates. Why? Because in the 1950s, nursing homes were created, and they often weren't in the same town where they lived. So whereas mine lived in Sempronius, I found records in Niles, Moravia, and Homer. Homer was the one that surprised me. I didn't know my ancestor died here. I thought it was Sempronius. And it gets even crazier. Cincinnatus? Yeah. Again, before 1819, remember it was Cincinnatus. So if you're looking for a land record or possibly a probate, meaning a will, that's been proven by town justice typically. And there's Cortland. Pretest. If you had ancestors in and around Virgil, Lapeer, or Hartford, where should you search for records? Virgil, Lapeer, or Hartford, and Cortland County too. You look at both. Town clerks have an incredible amount of material that they can share if you're nice.
Yeah.
Gotta be nice.
Yeah.
Gotta be nice. Vicki Becker up at Sempronius told me the first time, said, well, you're driving down 41A out of, let's see, Mandana, and then you're in the Niles, New Hope, and then you go down, she says, well, when you see the buffalo herd on the left, the town hall's on the right. And sure enough, and I went in, she said there's an old book we have. Because in New York State, it was required from, I think it was 1882, to keep birth, marriage, and death records. That's why you can't find your great-grandparents, because some of them were born before 1882. I was blessed that my great 3 grandmother was the first to be recorded in Sempronius. Her name was Lucinda Mather Wood, and I didn't know we had a Mather in our family. I found out that my great-grandfather's father died when he was 3 years old. I never knew that, because I knew his step-granddad. I did not know my own grandfather. His name was William Mather Wood. Same Mather that traces back to Compton Mather of the witch trials in Boston. Yeah, we were Mathers.
I was an
There are a lot of Mathers in Sempronius, Sand Hill Cemetery.
I'm an Esty who was hung.
There you go. Fortunately, his wife lived, I hope. Or the children did.
The children did, yeah.
Does anyone have any witches?
Yeah,
Do you? I've
2.
proven 3.
I've got 2.
Mine was the first male, I think, in New England to be executed, 1651. And I had the court trial from Hartford, and there's no indication whatsoever of accusation. You don't know why he was executed, except his second wife, who I don't descend from, I descend from his first. His second wife did some things that I guess were considered witchcraft in those days. I have 2 that were victims of witchcraft, which is interesting. In other words, they died and they claimed as a result of witchcraft. I also have an aunt who was a psychoanalyst study of witchcraft, which is kind of interesting. But again, it was not my direct line. It was the sister of my immigrant ancestress. Family genealogy is like detective work. You're always searching for clues. Lineage is like a puzzle, and you're searching for the pieces. Oops, I already did that. Oh, now we're starting. I've highlighted Cortland in red just to show you that's one theme that's in here. I trace my roots to Cuba, Cortland, and Tioga counties. My father's name is Wade Morton. You'll see Morton capitalized in red because I'm going to show you how Morton's got to Cortland. My mother's name was Marlene Ava Katie, and I'll show you how the Katies came to Cortland. Okay? So you'll see that thing. Now here's how I wrote mine. I know I was born at the hospital in Auburn because I saw a little thing my mother put in my baptismal book. So I was born in Auburn, but at birth I lived in the town of Owasco. I was baptized in Senate, and I was married in Fayetteville, but not really. I was there. Yeah. No, I was I was married in Sullivan, Madison County, New York. But the legal document, talk about changing, says Fayetteville, New York. Fayetteville was 5 miles from where we were. We were in the town of Manly. It's a place called Sky Ridge Country Club. Back in the hippie days, we decided we were going to get married outdoors near a pool. But the town justice in Manly said, can't do it, what if it rains? So I said, I can do it. I just called my minister. So I called my Methodist minister from Auburn, and he says, yeah, I'll come over and marry you. So I said, ooh, cool, religious ceremony on top of everything. But because they worried about the weather, we were married in the clubhouse, which is in Madison County. I saw the document. The pool was in Onondaga County. The clubhouse was in Madison. And was the town of Sullivan.
Wow.
And my minister so noted.
And you're not even back a generation ago.
That's right. So talk about changing. I don't think so. But I even disagree with Fayetteville. I wasn't in the village of Fayetteville. They did it in the 1970s because of zip code. Had nothing to do with where I was.
Yes.
Any other time they would have said the town of Manlius, which was wrong, but a little more accurate than the village of Fayetteville, which was 5 miles down the road. But I think this stuff's kind of interesting, the first 3. I don't know if you know Owasco and Senate, but that's a little bit of a hike. My parents went to church in Senate because that's where my grandparents went to church. So they drove in, one of those 1950 cars all the way to Senate on Sundays, and that's where I was baptized. I have a picture to prove that. That's the church, by the way. Do you know the Lighthouse Church in Senate? Probably not. It's the closest thing to a congregational church in Senate. As a matter of fact, I looked at the history, and the original founders of Senate did ordain a Congregationalist minister. Then it became Presbyterian. But yeah, I was baptized somewhere up there. This is where Senate is. And I'm sorry, but Wikipedia only gives me the outline, but at least you can see that's the city of Auburn. Wasco's right here. So we traveled somewhere from here up about there to church in those days. By the way, that's the reason my mother moved to Auburn. They didn't plow streets very well in those days. A little bit. She also hated the party lines. Where you're trying to call somebody and there were six or more people. That's where the village of Senate is. Now being Sempronius, do you know what church dominates that township? Yes. Anyone from Sempronius knows Baptist.
I'm from Somerville.
There you go, I am too. The Lickville Cemetery, I'm related to virtually everyone in that cemetery. I was going to mention William Lick, but I'm not. My wife said, cut it short. The Baptist church was here. The Senate Federated, where I was baptized, is right around the corner within walking distance. My father's family moved from Auburn to Senate, and that's where they went to church. My mother's family from Sempronius went to the Baptist, so I was in both. The Baptists had a lot more fun at Halloween, I remember that. Oops, I'm going backwards.
You figured out how to do that.
I don't think so. Okay, let's go forward. Okay, you met my parents. My grandparents, and this is what you should do if you haven't done it already. Put down as much as you know about your grandparents. Now, I always knew that, number one, Emery was spelled without an O. The family records that are here at the Cortland County Historical Societies have the O, but I know that's not correct. Because I have his marriage and his death, and we always said two E's. The L, that's all it is. We can't prove any middle name.
What's his gravestone have in it?
Oh, Emery L spelled the same as mine, with the E, if that was the question. And he was born down in Tioga County in Richford, right on the border of Cortland. My grandmother was born in Auburn. Both of my maternal grandparents were born in Sempronius. Oops, you're right, I learned how to do that. It's going backwards now. Yep, okay, then, I should have asked you the question, I didn't. How many great-grandparents do we all have? 8. It's arithmetic. One of you have 2 parents, 4 grandparents, 8 great-grandparents. Do you know who they were? And do you know where they were born? I bet you don't. I bet you know who they were, but do you know where they're born? And that's important. Warren Center, Pennsylvania. Lapeer, New York. Owego, New York, down in Tioga. Red Creek, up in Wayne County near Lake Ontario. Sempronius, Niles, the green is for, yeah, her father was from Ireland. Clifford Lucius Wood. Now, Lucius is important, I'm telling you. Get the middle name. Start using your own middle name. It's important. Sadly, in the census records, gravestones, seldom are middle names used. You can get a lot of information from middle names. Clifford Lucius Wood was born in Sempronius, and his wife, Carrie Rose Fuller, was born in Waterford, Pennsylvania. How the heck did they meet each other? 1894. How did they meet each other? Well, the Fullers were really from Summerhill. They removed to Erie County, Pennsylvania, down west of New York on Lake Erie, and Waterford is near Edinburgh. You might have at least heard the name. It's near Erie, Pennsylvania. And they'd had enough and moved back to Summerhill. So that's where they met. If you haven't seen this, it's kind of significant because this is what we're all up
Oh
against.
my gosh.
That's you right there. Okay? You have 2 parents, 4 grandparents, 8 great-grandparents, 16 great-great-grandparents, and 32 great-3 or great-great-great-grandparents. Now, when people tell me they don't follow women, I can't stand that. I say, you're missing so much. Because your name, let's say my name's Morton, that's me right there, that's my Morton. That's Francis Morton. Ignores 31 other people. And the women are much more fascinating than you are, believe me. They really are. If you had somebody famous, someone mentioned a relative may have been a Native American Indian. Maybe. But I bet you don't have it under the Morton line. One of these people over here might. So if you ignore them, you're going to ignore a lot of stuff. All my Pilgrim ancestry came from these other people. I will have to say most of them came through Sempronius, but they weren't from the Mortons. The Mortons were not Pilgrims. But there are others over here that trace, like the Mather line traces to William Brewster.
How long did it take you to do that?
I started seriously in 2008. My great aunt stimulated my interest, and people talk that I have always been interested, but I've never really proven with records. I've looked at other people's records, And for example, my first Mayflower application, which was my absolute first, took me about 5 months. Took me 5 months. After that, I could probably do it in a couple of weeks or a week.
I just found out last summer that my father's mother's name was Catherine. For all these years, I didn't know.
Yep. And it becomes important because you might find that her mother's name was Catherine,
I
or a
don't
sister
know.
was
The
Catherine,
interesting thing on this is
spelled with a C.
when my grandmother died, there was a piece in the Auburn paper like this.
Yep.
It said the wife of, or the headline was tragedy to mother of 7. She had 7 kids. My father was the 7th.
Yep.
Never mentioned her name, her mother and father's name. She had either 2 sisters and a brother, or 2 brothers and a sister. Didn't mention them. Didn't mention any of the 7 kids. What it mentioned was her husband's name was James, and it mentioned his name, wife of James, 7 children, and said about her mother and father.
Didn't identify the
I
children.
don't know whether they were, maybe in those days, they didn't want you to know who your relatives were, because,
Or it depends on who wrote it.
yeah.
I went to a church memorial for a woman who was so near and dear to our hearts in the school district, and the 2 sons refused to let anyone from the school district attend. Or not attend, but to speak. So we were in very large attendance. She was a school board member. Never once was it mentioned that she served the school and served it admirably. She attended more
That's
events.
funny, why, I wonder why.
It depends. It could be the son. Could be whoever wrote the article. Now, just to give you an idea of generations, somebody, I guess we said that I have proven about 360, probably closer to 400 now, families. But look at this. 12 or 13 will take you back to the Mayflower. William Brewster's 14 for me. You have 8,192 grandparents. Yeah, it's overwhelming. And if you go back farther, if you go back to England or to wherever, Yugoslavia or wherever you want to go, it gets daunting. Now, there's a way to reduce this, and I can tell you a couple of my secrets. How many of you will acknowledge that you were descended from first cousins? You probably don't even know. I have at least 32 first cousins, which means you have the same branch off those women. Joel Morton, who came to Cortland, married his first cousin, Violet Wells, and on the tombstone it says Joel and Violet Morton. But their mothers were Bardwells, Abigail and Esther. They were sisters. But I have many first cousins, and I bet you do. I bet you go back and you'll see you have first cousins. The other thing is, sometimes, sadly, we don't know who the names of women are, especially the last name.
Yes.
It might say Joel and Violet Morton, Violet who? So that will reduce what you can find considerably. But I would say the third area are common ancestors. And when you start messing around with this stuff, you'll find out that both your mother and father descend from, the same pilgrim back at the 13th generation. That will reduce how many people you're really looking for. It gets repetitive. Ancestry does a fairly good job of that too. I can't believe. I think I'm up to 32 I've proven. Common ancestors for both my mother and father.
My mother and father descend from the same set of witch Estes, the town families.
Yep.
Town family, but yeah.
Now, my 19th century roots, this is the 1800s, traced to these towns, and I highlighted in red the states just so when a lot of garble leak, look, my wife says too detailed, but it gives you an idea that even with your great-grandparents and your great-great-grandparents, you're going to cover a lot of territory. And in my case, 1, 2, 3, 4 states.
But no one stayed in Massachusetts, that's interesting.
This is 1800 only.
Yeah. That's what
Joel Morton was born in Massachusetts,
Right.
but not in 1800.
It's
1800, he was living here in New York.
Interesting.
Oh, I have lots in Massachusetts, probably 50% are from Massachusetts, 30% are from Connecticut, and probably 20% are from Rhode Island. Shall we get started? I guess we better only have 5 minutes left. Has anyone ever heard of Kelligsville? If you're from Sempronius, you do. Okay, Kelligsville is a little hamlet up there near New Hope.
Yep.
It's in the town of Niles.
Yep.
The cemetery, though, Kelligsville
In the
Cemetery.
town of Niles?
Yeah, it's in the town of Niles.
Yep.
But the cemetery is in Sempronius.
Yep.
Here's why. Because prior to 1829, actually it was 1833 that Sempronius was broken up. Kelligsville was right here, and the cemetery was right there, right next to each other. So if you're looking for vital records at that time, you better look in Sempronius. Niles didn't exist. The old township of Sempronius was divided into Sempronius, Niles, and Moravia. Niles was named after the very Reverend Robert Niles, who was buried, by the way, at the Kelligsville Cemetery in 1816. The Kelligsville Cemetery is in Sempronius today, where it's always been. And you can see the town of Niles was created here. There you go. Kelligsville is right on the border. Cemetery is, I think, over here, underneath Luther Fuller. Sempronius, yeah, there's Kelligsville right there. My grandfather grew up in Bear Swamp. He always talked about Bear Swamp. Today we call it the deer capital of the Central New York region. Sempronius is now only this little dot, whereas it used to be Sempronius, Moravia, and Niles, the three of them, and Moravia. The Morton family and how we got to Auburn. I'm going to go through this very quick. Some of you have seen it before, some haven't. I'm not going back to when we immigrated, just how we got to Auburn from Cortland County. Joel and Violet Wells Morton, they were married in Deerfield, Hampshire County, Massachusetts in 1781. Their son Francis Morton was born in Whately, Hampshire County, Massachusetts. In 1811, the northern half of Hampshire County became Franklin County. After who? Probably Benjamin Franklin. But no one knew who he was until about 1811. I mean, they kind of knew, but he wasn't quite that important. But as far as Joel knew and Francis, they were living in Hampshire County. Well, it wasn't really true. They left Whately between 1791 and 93, as described in his Revolutionary War pension. Ancestry.com is doing a great job of pulling up pensions. I've got one pension that's 41 pages long. It's worth reading as much as you can. I found proof of birth and location, proof of marriage, all sorts of things. Joel described what he did after the Revolution. Well, here's Whately today. It's part of Franklin County, but when Joel and Francis were there, it was part of Hampshire, which covered both the yellow and the brown below. During the Revolution, the minister moved his records out of Whately up to Deerfield. So I found the marriage record, which took me about 5 years, in the neighboring town. I never even thought of looking there. You need to look at neighboring towns.
Your relatives must have been hanging around with mine.
Probably.
The dates are right for...
According to the history of Hatfield, and histories are good too. The history of Cortland would be great. History tells us they moved to Brookfield, and I don't even see it on a map. I know it's up near Montpelier. For a short period of time, oops, I'm doing it again.
If there's anybody here that's interested in the Seventh-day Baptists, see that Coleraine and Layden?
Yeah.
The previous map,
Oh, I can't.
the previous map. No, that's not it. The one that said in Massachusetts.
I got it.
Right there, Coleraine and Layden that are up by Windham County. The Seventh-day Baptists came from Rhode Island and settled in Layden and Coleraine, and there's a huge cemetery up there, not huge.
Oh, way up here.
Twice the size of this room, with the earliest Seventh-day Baptists buried in it. I read all the stones and documented it.
They come from Westerly?
Yes. And then they went from there into New York State
All right.
to DeRuyter.
Now, Joel tells us in his pension that after they left Vermont, they moved to Norwich. So I went over to that historical society, and they have a lot during on his Revolutionary War activities, and also one of his sons, Ramsel, lived in Shenango County and stayed there. His other son, Francis, moved to Cortland. And he convinced his dad and his mother to move with them. So in the Hartford Cemetery, I'm really blessed with this roster because they did quite a description of my ancestors. But there's Joel and Violet, their son Francis, his wife Susan, Spencer Morton was the son of Francis, and Agnes was Spencer's wife. They're all buried there. And a stone was put on for my Revolutionary War grandparent here in Cortland County. Francis and Susan, I discovered this through a newspaper article down in Binghamton in 1912 when there was a family reunion dedicated to Francis and Susan McCullough, which I think is an Irish name, Morton. But that's all I have. I can't prove any further, but at least I have a hint for what the name was. They moved to Cortland by 1814, and that's where Spencer Morton was born at Virgil. I don't know how that happened. Okay, Spencer married a woman named Julia Bowen. I'm actually related to the Bowens. Warren Center, Bradford County, PA. Second, he married Agnes, who was 24 years younger, Birkbeck. Her parents were British, immigrated to Susquehanna County, PA, in a little place called Middletown. Their son, my great-grandfather, was William L. Morton, and he was born in Bradford, PA, which is right over the border from Tioga County. Right up here in the upper right-hand corner. And that's the only building I saw in Warren Center when I went.
Wow.
Sinclair gas station, but at least it said Warren Center.
Isn't that a neat building?
Used to be a gas station like that between Cortland and Homer.
Sure. By 1865, the family of Spencer and Agnes removed to Richford, Tioga County. There's Richford. Spencer and Agnes Burbeck Morton are buried with his parents, Francis and Susan McCullough. They're on the same stone. And I use that same stone as proof of father-son relationship at the Hartford Cemetery in Hartford, Cortland County. There's Hartford, way down here in the lower left. And there's proof of the pudding, the cemetery roster. William married a woman named Alice Muckey, who was born in Lapeer, Cortland County. They were moved to Auburn, New York. That's how I got there. Can't tell you when, because in the census of 1900, they're still in Richford. The census, the New York State census of 1905, they're in Auburn. And Auburn's kind of dead center in the county, kind of like the city of Cortland. How the Cadies came to Sempronius, or the surrogate records clerk in Cayuga County wants me to write a story on why Sempronius. You know, I keep asking, I grew up with it. My two maternal grandparents lived in Sempronius, and they were married in Sempronius. Then they went to Center, New York. But why Sempronius? Well, they came from Windham County, Connecticut, in the upper right-hand corner, in a place called Canterbury. One thing I learned, and if you aren't familiar with this, you might want to write a source, the Barber Collection. Okay, B-A-R-B-O-U-R, Barber Collection. All the vital records in Connecticut, blue books, probably a couple of yards wide. It'll give you every town in Connecticut, almost every town. And I found that actually marriage records were found in Brooklyn, Scotland, Windham, Plainfield, Killingly, Putnam, and Pontefract. So look at your neighboring towns. Johnson and Mary Adams Cady of Canterbury removed to Cortland. They went straight from Connecticut to Cortland by 1829. That's when their son was born, and he tells me in the census that he was born in Cortland. George C. Cady was born in 1829 at Solon, Cortland County, New York. Why did they move to Solon? I looked up the history. I always wondered, where the heck did the name Johnson come from? That's not a first name that's very common. Well, his uncle's name was Johnson Bingham. And his uncle is a founder of Solon. He came here somewhere between 1794 and 1798. Baptist. Yeah, Baptist.
And you know where he came from?
Yeah, he came from Canterbury with Johnson Cady. So I always wondered, why Solon? You know, why not Cortland or Homer or something? They went there because that's where his uncle was. Follow the relatives. It's kind of hard, but you get into some of these family genealogy books and they'll tell you where the relatives went. So they were in Solon. And how do I know Solon and not another place? Because Solon's been divided. Because of the Baptist cemetery in Solon. And Johnson was the founder of Solon, Johnson Bingham. Johnson and Mary Cady and the family removed to Sempronius by 1840. And that's what I grew up knowing, the Cady estate, which has been there since Johnson and Mary moved. Way up here, Bear Swamp in this area. Somewhere in there it'll probably say Cady. Yeah, there it is, Cady right there. Yeah, they were right on the border. They're more my great-grandparents are much more known in New Hope or Niles because there was no road out of Sempronius. They had to go up either Glenhaven or there's another street that you go into New Hope before you go back down into Sempronius. However, the records are in Sempronius. The historical stuff, you know, Secretary for the Grange shows my great-grandmother in New Hope, but no, they didn't live there, nor are there vital records there. My grandparents, Floyd Cady and Norma Wood, were born and married in Sempronius. By 1918, they were moved to Senate, New York. I don't know why. I never asked Grandpa. I can prove 1918 because they became members of the Baptist Church in May. I know his brothers and his father had moved there, so it could have been relatives, not necessarily farming. Why did our ancestors move so much? By the way, most of them walked. In a family Bible I discovered the Brown family, and that was the family reunion at Fillmore Glen. We used to call it the Brown-Lawrence family reunion. Great-grandmother was a Brown, who married a Wood. And in her Bible, there were notes, and one of the notes was when her grandfather and grandmother, Moses Brown and Sarah Mathewson, walked from Burrillville, Rhode Island to Sempronius. 300 miles.
How long?
1829. I don't know how many days, although I probably could do that, but I never did. I do know when they hit Albany that there were cousins in Albany who wanted a reunion, and all Moses and Sarah wanted was sleep. The men walked, the one oxen carried the furniture that could be put on the wagon, and the women and children sometimes rode the wagon, so they might be a mile or so ahead of the men walking. But he talked about walking that whole distance. And try this. Within 2 years, he walked back with Sarah to sell her land in Burrillville to her brother, which was good for me because I've got their names and it says Moses and Sarah Brown from Sempronius sell to, I can't remember his name, Josiah, her name was Mathewson, in Burrillville, Rhode Island.
I hope it's dated so you know they walked in the summer.
No, I do know that it was in November. It's around Veterans Day, November 11th. Oh yeah, it was not nice. And they did, that's when they walked from Burrillville to Sempronius. I'm not sure what time period they walked back to Burrillville. Here are some ideas. for you. The father's will or probate grants his land to his eldest son. Well, what about the second, third, fourth, fifth, and sixth? Yeah, that's why they left. And land after the Revolution was available in central New York. Other family members, like Johnson Bingham, had already moved here. That's why you go. Got somebody to stay with. I'll stay in his log cabin.
And Bingham's are really, yeah, married into the Wadsworth
Yeah.
side of the family.
They followed ministers. Don't shortchange the church, because I'm telling you what I've discovered between 1800 and 1820, ministers were significant. They could make or break you. Who moved or they had a disagreement with the majority church. All my Baptists got in trouble in Bennington, Vermont.
Oh.
That's why they moved to Sempronius.
That's right.
Because they signed a petition, which I have a copy of, against the majority church. There was only one church in Bennington, the Congregational Pilgrim Church.
Yep.
And they signed a petition against the majority church of Bennington. If they'd stayed, probably they would have been hanged. That's what I think. But anyways, they got on the old oxen and walked down to Sempronius. Actually, not quite. They went to Stillwater on the Hudson River, then to Sempronius. Political events, Revolutionary War. Now there's land. How's George Washington going to pay all these soldiers? Give them land. And that's what they did. The War of 1812 also. The military track of 1783, we also know. One thing we shortchanged, for example, last night I was with my wife, we were without electricity for 8 hours. And I'm thinking, oh, I got to do this presentation and I'm not sleeping. The smoke detectors are ringing and my dogs are going wild. Anyways, natural disasters. My family from Tioga County moved in 1816. What happened in 1816? Two things. The Providence hurricane and the year without summer.
Okay.
There was frost in July. The hurricane filled the city of Providence with over 10 feet of water.
Wow.
We've had enough. So they moved, in that case, they moved to Tioga County. Here's an idea I discovered in Rhode Island. People just wanted to be left alone. They were so tired of the church, especially the majority church. They were tired of government officials. They were tired of politicians. They were tired of everything. And I think Solon, Virgil, and Sempronius seemed to work. If you want to get away from it all, come on up to Sempronius. There were 800 residents when it was founded, and I think there's about 800 today, according to what Vicki told me. She said, Dave, believe it or not, women have babies and they come and tell me 2 years later. Sounds like the old days.